Today we will be discussing about writing API calls in Flutter using TDD approach. So TDD is, as you know, test-driven development. We won't be doing test-driven development, but we will just be writing our API calls using that approach. So we'll be doing this in Flutter in Dart code, and we won't be generating or we won't be writing any UI for now. I'll just be showing you how to consume an API and bring the data into your app using this approach. So for those who don't have Flutter, they can go to flutter.dev and set this up. So it's pretty basic. So let's just start. The question arises why we should do this and why we are doing this. So there are two parts of an app. And the first part is and the UI, and the second part is the data that you want to populate in the UI. So that data can be from anywhere, right? Like it can be through REST API, it can be through any other backend that you have made. So while developing UI, the developer should be concentrated completely on developing the UI and not uh, worrying about whether the API is working or the data is being fetched properly. So these two things should be separated. So while developing some apps, I came across this idea that I should write first the tests using TDD approach just to consume the data, and then when all the data is consumed, all the models are being made, and then we move to the UI so that we can completely concentrate on developing the UI. So what is TDD? TDD is basically we have a lot of complex sentences regarding TDD. So in simple words, I should write it as this. Mm, Write code that creates errors. Write code that only fixes those errors. Write more code that creates errors. So these are the three basic steps that we follow in TDD. So basically what we do is we write code and it starts to break. So basically we write a test. We think ourselves as a business, as a QA, and we write the business logic first, and it starts to crash. And then we start solving those errors step by step, and then we write more code, and then we solve errors, and then we write code, and then solve errors. So this is iterative. So it might be confusing right now, but let's just start. So I have this simple Flutter app, the first Flutter app that you get when you run a Flutter create command. This is a counter example. So we don't have to do anything regarding this. We just need to go here in the test. We need to create one new file. Let's say API underscore test. And we just see what we have here in test. So we just create a main function and we create a test. And we say this is API test, and we create a function in here, async function, and we import this test. So let me just zoom it so that you can see better. Okay, so we have this test created. Now we'll start writing our test that we want to do. So let's just first see what API are we gonna consume. So we have this JSON placeholder website which has some fake APIs for developers. So we'll just pick up any API like this API, the users API, right? So we have these 10 users, and the JSON data is being returned through this, and we want to consume this API in our code. So let's just begin. Uh, First of all, we want a class that returns some users, right? So we'll just say my users API equals to my users API. So what I did here is I just asked the code to assume that there is some class which is called my users API, and it should be there. It should be somewhere. for consuming an API, I should have a class. So now it starts giving me errors. So we just move to our text edit and we see write code that creates errors. So we just wrote some code and which is now showing errors. Now we write the code only that only fixes those errors, right? So we'll just write some code that will fix this error which is being shown here. So if you have a good ID, so you just hit Alt Enter and you will see that it will show you create class. When you create it, the errors are gone. So now we just created a class using this is basically complete TDD approach that you write first and then you create the production code. So now we want to create more errors now. So we'll create more errors. We'll say var users equals to, we'll just blindly say that API dot get users. Get me the users. That's it. We'll just ask it to get users. We don't know what's inside it and we don't know whether it's existent or not. Now it started giving error. Now we'll just alter enter it and we'll remove the errors. So we have a method here which says get users. Now we'll say we'll create more errors now. We'll say users dot okay, not users, print users dot first dot name. So what we did here, we say that we assume that users is a list of something and you pick up its first element and then you print its name. When we run this, we'll get errors, right? So errors are not only the errors which are occurring during compile time. Errors are all those errors which occur during compile time and during runtime. So let's just see what happens when you run this. So test started. We'll see what it does. I don't know what it will do. This is the first time I'm doing something like printing an empty. So see, the getter first was called on null. So we have an error, right? So we just move towards our theory. Write code that only fixes those errors. Write more code that creates more errors. So we just created some more code that created some more errors. So now we'll just fix those errors. So we say that users is a list. We assume that it's a list. So get users should return a list. So we say future list of users. Now it's saying, oh, we should put async here. So now it's saying that users doesn't exist. So we wrote some code that is throwing errors. Cool. So we'll just fix it now. We'll hit until enter. We'll say create a class that is called users. Cool. So now it's saying it should have a name, right? It's saying you should have a name. So we'll just hit alt enter and we'll say create a getter that is called name. So we'll just say it's string. So now we are step by step creating errors and solving them. Now it's saying that it should have a return type. So we should return a list of users here, right? But we need to call an API here. So here comes now the API calling part. So you must have understood what is the overall idea of TDD using TDD approach. So basically this is the smallest implementation of TDD. When you write your normal applications code, you follow this in your code as well, not in just test. So you will see how beneficial it is for you. You will be creating code that is having very less errors and efficient coding. So let's just start calling the API. So we have this link which will get us users. So before we get to the link, we need to go to pubdev and we need to get the HTTP package that we will be needing to call our API, right? So we'll be calling our API like this is client.post. We'll say client.get. So let's install this. We go to the PubSpec. We paste it here. We say packages.get and we have the packages. Yeah. So we'll just import this command which it says here import this here, and we have this HTTP now. Now we'll say HTTP dot get the URL, and we'll have the response. Var response equals to await HTTP dot get. Why we are saying await? Because this get is a future function, so we need to wait until this function finishes. So we'll just paste the URL here. We go here, we copy this URL, we paste it, and for our for the sake of our confirmation, we just print response dot body here. This is a string which will be returned. So we just test it now. We are not returning anything for now, so this is still gonna give us some errors. So for now we can just comment it, and we can see that whether our API is being called successfully or not. So ideally when I run this, this should print this whole string in our code. So let's just run it. So here we go. We have this whole string printed in our code. So let's just move forward. We need to return the list of users here uh, from our API. So now uh, we need to convert this into some JSON and then into some class. We need to convert it into a class of users. So uh, for the sake of simplicity, let's just let me introduce you something which is called JSON2 dot. We can write our code ourselves, which converts the whole JSON into a class, but that's too much coding, and that's too much of hectic work, which has been simplified by this person and this guy who has created this beautiful web. You can just, this guy Javier, and you can just paste your JSON here and it will generate you the whole Dart code. So thanks to this guy, and we are proud of him, and we should just uh, pick our JSON from here, and we paste the JSON here, and we say uh, user items. So we have this items, and it says the whole converted JSON data into the class. So what it does is it created one object of this whole data type in our class, right? So this is the whole data that you are seeing here, right? So we'll just do nothing, we'll just copy the whole thing and we'll paste it in our code, and we'll just rename this to users. Okay, so it's giving me errors now, so we should rename it using Shift F6 users. Sorry, my bad. Users. So now we have users. I guess it should be user, not users. Sorry. So we have this user class, which is converting our data into our object, our JSON data into our object. So this is pretty much explainable. It's nothing, just we are just passing that map, and it's converting its map into our object. So now we need to just convert this response.body into JSON into a map, and then send it to user class so that it can generate a class. So let's say we var list equals to response.body, and we say JSON decode. So JSON decode is a function which takes a string and converts it into some valuable map as list. So why I did as list? Why did I just write as list? It's because I myself know that I am receiving a list from the API. So if you are receiving a list from the API, you parse this JSON response.body as list. If you are not receiving a list, so you don't need to write this. So let's just see if this list has a length of 10 or not. Just for the sake of confirmation, we are just running the code again just to see whether our list has a length of 10 or not, because they are these returned user, these are I guess 10. I guess they are 10. So let's just run this and see if the length is 10 or not. Cool, the length is 10. That means that our list is successfully parsed in into a map, which is a list of map using JSON decode. Now we just need to convert it into a user object and a list of users, and we need to return it back to our uh, code. So let's just write one more line and we'll be done. So we write return. This might confuse you, the next line, so just relax. This is nothing fancy. This is a function. You must have used it a lot of times. Map function in the list, which maps every item of the list to the item that we want. User.fromJSON. From.json is a function which is already created by that beautiful guy that we had, and the guy who created this web page. So he has generated this to JSON code for us. So from JSON code for us. We have this from JSON. Yep, yeah, we have this from JSON code here. So we just call this function from JSON, and we pass this item here, and we convert it into a list. So this is just one line which is converting our whole list of that JSON data into the list of our user. So this will return a list of users, and now we can successfully, I guess if it works, we can successfully print the first name and the name of our first user. So let's just run it and we'll see. Cool, we have this and the name of this first user. So in test driven development, there are assert statements, like we write assert statements that assert users dot name should not be null. So that is proper TDD. I'm just telling you the approach, the TDD approach, so that you can just consume the APIs first and then jump to the UI. So now we see that we have completed this whole API calling part. So now we are confirmed, and now we are pretty much sure that our API is working perfectly and our data is being parsed perfectly and our users are being retrieved. Now you can just move to your UI part and just call this single line code from there, and it will start working. Okay, so before I end my video, I just want to make sure about one thing, that you should create a new file here in the lib folder or under any other folder, and you should say user underscore API, and you move the whole code, the class, this user API class, into that folder, into that main file. Why I'm doing that? Just because I think that uh, I will be making few more videos in the meantime, so I'll be using the same project structure for creating more videos. So for the sake of that, I'm just creating a good project structure so that you guys can understand what's going on. So we just imported this library, and this user class also should be moved to somewhere, because this is a model class, so this must be moved to a model class. So basically we just did one more thing in our video, which was to implement a sort of MVC. So this is a model which is converting our data into JSON. This is the API, that is the controller obviously. So we'll just import this as well, and here we go. This is the API, this is the model. The API is calling the network calls. You can also further encapsulate the network calls as well. So you can just write a short wrapper of network calls, so you don't need to call the links in the API. So API, the controller will be only responsible for business logic. So that's something that you can do afterwards. So we'll just import this. We'll just remove irrelevant imports just for the clean code, and we run this once again just to see that if our code is working fine or not. Cool. So our code is working fine. So whenever now you want to create something in the API, you just need to create an object of this class myUserAPI, just like we did here. So consuming in the UI, now you will just have to write these two lines of code and you will get your users, and then you can use it seamlessly in your UI. So this was just a basic introduction. I hope you guys like it, and I'll be creating more videos hopefully, and I'll try to use the same code for further videos. We'll just see how we can follow this up. Thank you so much, and we'll just look forward to another one. Thank you.